Okay, we should be live now.
Yay, great.
Okay. So, I wanted to do a quick intro for sorry.
No, it's totally okay.
Okay, sorry, I was in the background. Just double checking. We are in fact live. So, thank you for joining me today, Alexis Henderson. This is a follow-up to Solar Powered's discussion of your book, Year of the Witching, that we had yesterday. For those who don't know, Solar Powered Afrofuturism Slow Reading Group is a virtual book club created by Jerry, who's a booktuber over at Onyx Pages. I'm one of the co-admin, and then Sister Sci-Fi, the bookseller, is also a co-admin. And we read your book yesterday. We usually like to bring in authors for Q&A, and so this is the Q&A portion. For people who haven't read the book yet, I was going to read off your website bio really quick to give people an introduction, if that's okay.
Yeah, totally.
So Alexis Henderson is a speculative fiction writer with a penchant for dark fantasy, witchcraft, and cosmic horror. She grew up in one of America's most haunted cities, Savannah, Georgia, which instilled in her a lifelong love of ghost stories. When she doesn't have her nose buried in a book, you can find her painting or watching horror movies with her feline familiar. Currently, Alexis resides in the sun-soaked marshland of Charleston, South Carolina. Her debut novel, Year of the Witching, is out now, as we all know. Is there anything you'd like to add to the bio?
Only that I've moved. I'm in Columbus, Ohio, and I'm just really terrible at updating my website. I've been here for like over a year now, but yeah, in my heart, I'm still in the Charleston, the sun-soaked marshland, missing the warmth.
So I had a few questions I wanted to ask. So there is a sequel coming out to this book, correct?
Yeah, yes.
Was it always the plan for this book to have a sequel, or is that something that sort of came about after you saw how the first one was received?
Kind of both. Like, I wrote it so that it had an ending that was firm enough to be a standalone, but just open enough that if I had the opportunity or was lucky enough to get a second book deal, that I could write something else. But as it turns out, writing sequels is easily the hardest thing I've ever attempted ever. And I'm writing, I think, is my one thing that I feel like I'm more confident when it comes to writing. So it's certainly hard, but not that hard. But writing this book has been my equivalent of I don't know, a really difficult chemistry class. Writing sequels is just completely taking me out of my element. So that's why it's taking so long. It's been delayed. I've worked on other things in the interim trying to figure out the sequel. So yeah, I don't know if I connect fully with the whole writing sequels thing. I definitely not envisioning myself as a George R. Martin type that can write sequel after sequel after sequel. I think in the future, I'm definitely more of a standalone kind of author. But we'll see. Maybe I'll figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say that I'm partial to standalones. I thought that I could read anything, and it was a recent discovery that I can't really do doorstopper fantasy, and I can't really do series that are more than a trilogy.
No, I'm often the same way, and I go into it with so much confidence. I'm I've got this. It doesn't even really matter how good it is. I think that at some point I'm just kind of creating a story that's complete unto itself, and I'm a huge fan of standalones for that reason. I love a good trilogy too, but I don't know if it's an attention span thing, and maybe even it's my taste as a reader affecting the way that I write. As a writer, my kind of preference for standalones is why writing sequels just doesn't come as naturally to me. Yeah.
So I think you had been on, who was it? Melanin Library. I remember you'd been on another YouTube channel, and you had mentioned that when you were pitching this book, you weren't really sure if you were going to pitch it to an imprint that was more YA focused or that was more adult focused, and you kind of went with the adult imprint. And I was wondering if that changes things about the sequel, that you did it or what tone or thing you're going to do now that okay, it's going in this adult market.
Absolutely. So had I published this book as YA, I love YA, but had I published as YA, I think I would have felt pressure to keep the characters within the certain YA age bracket and really not push past the very early 20s with their ages, because at that point I think it's an argument can be made that it's really no longer, YA.
Mhm.
With like it being adult, I have the option of kind of just aging Emmanuel up by a year. I could age her up by 10 years and do a time jump. Like it does kind of open doors in that way. Yeah, because sometimes like, I read really good YA books and I'm like, I wonder what this character looks like at 25, but they've made the same decision, like where would the story go if there had been a time jump? And I think it's cool to be able to conceptualize the sequel that way, and not have this kind of like limit on how much time I have with the characters, or like knowing that, okay, when this character turns 19 or 21 or whatever the age is in my head that I feel like makes it not YA, that I have to kind of close the door to that world of that story. So yeah. Yeah, that's cool. And it's cool to be able to deal with like adult problems in books, um, like marriage, or like, nitty gritty things that like, I guess aren't really YA focused, but
Mhm.
I still feel like it's like, YA into adult, to me, I've always kind of viewed it as more of like a spectrum. And it's not that you can't have that like pure kind of YA spirit and still be dealing with problems that are adult. And I think that's why I love writing about characters that are kind of in their early 20s, because you still have this like YA naivete and like figuring out the world and understanding the world that they're entering into, this like a scary adult world, but they're dealing with kind of adult problems with this like, young adult innocence. And that's kind of interesting to me. So yeah, that's something that I look forward to exploring more with like the characters in the Year of the Witching, but also like in other books too.
Yeah, it's interesting with adult how much flexibility you get, and that like if it's middle grade, you kind of have to, if it's middle grade or YA, there's an expectation like your characters are going to have to be the same age as the audience. And with adult, you can kind of write so many different ages. It's really
Yeah,
about the subject matter.
yeah.
You had mentioned that you had some other things in the works as well. Um, I don't know if you had written any short stories before, but are you working on more novels? Are you working on short stories? Like, can you give us a teaser of what else you're working on?
Yeah, I can actually. So I'm feeling good right now because I'm about to hit one deadline for a novel I'm working on, a standalone. I should be turning that in on the 30th, and that's exciting. It's like gothic um, horror. I can't talk too much about it, but I feel like it's in the same vein as The Year of the Witching. Like if you liked that, you like this. Um, I'm also part of an anthology with Patrice Caldwell.
Oh,
Yeah, it's called Eternally Yours. Previously, Patrice did This Phoenix Must Burn, I think, and
yeah,
I
First Must Burn.
love,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That was
yeah,
a good
loved
one.
it, loved it. And so I'm really honored to have a short story in her upcoming anthology. I just turned that in, and I'll be doing copy edits on it soon. Oh, I guess I can talk about that short story a little bit, but it's like a paranormal YA fallen angel romance, except for the angel in the romance is like looks in appearance like the more like the angels that are described in the Bible. It's like many eyes, kind of cosmic horror, a bunch of wings and like rings shifting. And
Yeah.
so that was really cool because Patrice had seen a tweet where I jokingly said that I wanted to see that as a paranormal romance, and Patrice was just like, why don't you write it? And it was one of the most fun things that I wrote, I think, well, this year. Yeah, because I think I turned it in the draft over early summer, early spring. Yeah, so those are the two that are like in the works. And then I should be part of an anthology that hasn't been announced yet, so I won't say anything about that, but I'm super excited to be working on that, and I can't wait till it's announced. I think that like anyone who's kind of into like my work will definitely be into this like upcoming anthology that I can't say anything about, but super excited for it. I love writing short stories. Short stories are just so much fun. Like I feel like they're like condensed like mini novels, and sometimes when I want to have like scratch the itch of like writing, an entire short story, but I'm like, I just don't have it in me, or on another deadline, so I can't devote the like 8 months to a year it takes for me to write a novel. I write a short story, I feel accomplished, I feel like I've written something complete, and then yeah, it's just cool to kind of explore stories that way.
Yeah, I enjoy reading short stories. That's all I'll say. I like seeing people who even do something like in universe and different short stories, because I feel like I don't know, I feel like the general, like, I guess readership doesn't know a whole lot about short stories and stuff, like the magazines and stuff they're putting them out. So it seems like, I don't know, if you find like connections and stuff, it feels like you're on this like scavenger hunt, like an uncharted territory, because like
I love
not as much
that.
talk about it.
Yeah.
Um, was going to ask you a question, but I'm completely blanking on what it was. I will circle it. Oh, I do remember. So kind of more into Year of the Witching specifically. This is a story where it's pretty, the people's focus is very insular because of the nature of the town. It's this religious leader who controls it, and control is very important to him. So people don't really leave the town. They don't know a whole lot about much about outside the town. So we're very focused on like Bethel proper. We hint a little bit at the people living in the outskirts, and Emmanuel's like very beautiful grandma lives in the city somewhere, but we don't get to see a whole lot of it in the book. Will we possibly see more of those locations in? I think he said Year of the Dawn is the.
It's had like several. Right now,
Okay.
it's called Dawn of the Coven. I don't even know if that one's gonna.
Okay, got it.
We'll see.
I think I pulled Year of the Dawn from the book. I think it was like the last line or something.
Yes,
like,
you're
next
right.
Year
And
will be Year of the
originally,
Dawn.
that's what I wanted it to be, and they're like, I think it wanted something more witchy. So I was like, okay, Dawn of the Coven. Yeah, which I like.
Okay.
Yeah.
But do you think can you tell us if those areas are going to get more focus in the next book? Or
Yes, definitely. I think the next book is definitely going to be less focused on Bethel and more focused on how Bethel becomes part of the greater world, maybe for the first time in a long time. So I definitely want to explore that more, but it's like, I think part of the difficulty is like, do I want to go full fantasy second world epic? Like how big is the scope of the world? And how much should I show and balancing, I guess, like the world building elements with like, the heart of like the character driven plot lines. But I definitely want to explore it, mostly because honestly, like also Vera is just, I'm also, I love Vera, and I just kind of like, can I just write about Vera? Like honestly, if somebody told me that I could just make her the main character of the sequel, I'd probably just go with that. Yeah, but I want to explore more for sure.
Cool. So another of my favorite, well, I didn't say my favorite aspect yet, I guess, but one of my favorite aspects of the story were the descriptions. Everything was so vivid. I could literally, like months after I'd finished the book, there were like 2 or 3 descriptions where like anytime anyone asked me about the book, I could like say like, oh, like these are the 3 descriptions. And I was curious if you had like author inspiration where like, that really got you into like this very descriptive, very lush writing, or if there are like exercises you did to hone that skill, or maybe it just comes naturally. Maybe that's going to be insane.
I mean, so I do have like authors I really look up to. N.K. Jemisin is one that comes to mind. I loved Handmaid's Tale, is a huge influence on me, just in like a like, I don't know, like that book's kind of personal to me because I read that book while I was still kind of involved in a fundamentalist cult. So I read it kind of being like, oh, this book is about people who live the way that like the people around me live, the people who go to my church live. And then I was like, wait a minute, like it kind of rang the alarm bell for me and kind of got me to woke up. So that book's kind of personal to me. But I feel like Margaret Atwood has a really good way of, her writing is not too flowery, I guess. It's very like, I think she's really good at practicing restraint with her writing. So I think when it comes to like the language of the book, I think I talk a lot just as a person. So I feel like a lot of like the like descriptions that maybe some could argue are pretty close to overwrought, like are just because I'm kind of tend to be like an expressive person in that way. But also I think growing up in the South, like the way that ghost stories are kind of told in the South is kind of in these overly descriptive, almost like flowery sort of way. And so I think that was like a big influence for me because that was kind of my touchstone. Like I guess the Southern Gothic was my touchstone to like that paranormal, spooky, witchy, woodsy horror. So I think that's probably also why I write in that style.
Oh, cool. I did not think the descriptions were overwrought. Like, what was it? I think the plague. So I always remember one of the fight scenes where someone gets their ears pierced and, the blood pools at the tips. I think you said like ruby earrings. And I can't give like more specifics, but like I think the first plague that hits Bethel with the water. That's one that I always think of.
Thank you. It's always like in edits, I'm always having to pull back just to make sure it's like not too much. But it's definitely like I think before my editor gets hold of it, like definitely overwrought, and then I dial it back. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
So there are, in addition to like, right, I guess I'm not great with geography, but somewhere near Bethel there is the Darkwood, and there are these 4 witches who live in the Darkwood. It was Lilith, Delilah, Jael, and Mercy. And I was curious how you picked like, and four is kind of a thing throughout. 'Cause it's also like the four plagues, correct, that are coming to Bethel.
Yeah.
Was there a reason why you went with the number four? How did you decide what traits you wanted each of these witches to have and pick their names and all that?
I've never been asked this question before, and I have a good answer for it. So I'm excited to get to talk about this. So it actually is because I write 4-act plots in my book. And so when I first thought about how many plagues should there be in the book, I was like, well, one per act. Like it just seemed like kind of went along with the structure of the story because I'm a 4-act writer instead of a 3-act. And so then I was like, okay, 4 plagues and maybe one for each witch. And then that's how I came upon the number 4. I wanted to make my job like easy. I had a failed book. I mean, I feel it as kind of like a failed book. It never went anywhere. I never finished, querying it. And it was a hard book for me to write. It took me like 2 or 3 years. I wrote it like through my whole time in college. And it was just really challenging structurally, like everything about it. And so I basically was just like, I really, really want to write something that is not that difficult as far as like structure, like a structure I have a firm handle on. So 4 acts, 4 witches, 4 plagues. It seemed to work pacing wise.
Mm-hmm. And I guess how did you pick the plagues and like how did you pick like the witch characteristics? So I felt like they each had like a distinctive character to them.
Yeah, so it's kind of a mix of like I did some like biblical research, like the story of Moses and the Pharaoh, those plagues I looked at, and I was kind of like, which are the most like cinematic, which ones are the most horrifying, how could I take those and make them somehow even worse? I mean, they're pretty bad as is. And then I also kind of reflected on the witches, the way that I saw them in my head. And I kind of more or less tried to pair like, one woman with each plague. And I sort of, their kind of personality, which is more like a vibe really, because it's not like they were talking to me. They're kind of like silent creatures, but yeah, I was kind of allowing their personalities to kind of shape how I viewed the plagues that they sort of spawned or that were sort of inspired by them, I guess. So yeah, that's how I tackled it. Yeah.
That makes sense. I was curious, so you talked a little bit about your editing process, and this is a question I like to ask authors in general, for like people who are interested in like behind the scenes stuff. Was there like a single edit that was like the toughest edit to make on this draft?
Oh my gosh, there's a lot to choose. Like I feel like that it was okay. Ooh. So before I even sold my book, I edited The Year of the Witching for almost a year with my previous agent. Those edits were really, really hard because there were many, many rounds of them. And I think my confidence got shaken quite a bit, which is not to say that they were bad edits. Like, I think I needed to do the work, but doing the work, that level of work when like you don't have anything to show for it yet, like in the form of a book deal, while all of your other friends are like, selling their books and becoming like authors, published authors, it was like, I felt kind of like everybody was leaving me behind. I was just like stuck. So those edits consisted a lot of world building edits. So those were kind of challenging for me, figuring out Bethel as a society and a structure. I also focused a lot on characters, namely Ezra was he was a difficult character because I felt this immense pressure to convey his complexity and at times his moral shakiness, but I wanted to stick only to Emmanuel's perspective. So everything about his character had to really be communicated through Emmanuel's experiences. Mm-hmm. And it was hard to kind of get that across at times. And then Emmanuel herself too, I think I worked a lot on her and her story arc. Because there was this balancing act where it's like I wanted her to grow a lot throughout the story, but also understanding that she's a traumatized girl who's been raised in essentially a cult, who doesn't have resources to necessarily understand kind of like the full impact of her own upbringing and the full sickness of her world. So how does she get from point A to point B, where she's kind of like naive and doesn't know the prophet's evil, to kind of being, for all intents and purposes, this like activist feminist sort of and I don't want to say archetype because she's like a living, breathing, fully, developed character to me, but a symbol of that. So yeah, that was difficult too. Her arc was hard. It was hard to nail, and honestly, just kind of emotionally taxing at times, to be quite honest, because she goes through some dark stuff. So yeah.
So you mentioned a little bit that Ezra was difficult to write for you. Was there anything about Ezra that made him particularly, was it just because he's like, I guess really the only main character besides Emmanuel, or is there something about like his, navigating like, oh, he's like so close to power and he's a prophet, but also he questions the prophet and stuff like that. What was it that made him difficult to write for you?
I think it was like I think part of it's just like his imperfectness and kind of balancing that. Like I wanted Ezra to in some way have to grapple with this like immense privilege he has in this society. And so if for Emmanuel kind of making her, I don't want to say reforming her, there wasn't really anything wrong with Emmanuel. She was doing the best she could. But with Ezra, I felt like he really kind of needed to be reformed. His worldview needed to be kind of jarred. He was incredibly self-centered, I guess, at the beginning of the book, and he was aware of some of the darker evils of the society and kind of was complicit and still participating in them as the prophet's heir. So kind of getting him to wake up and understand his role in the world and how he can and should use his privilege to like stand up against his father or help Emmanuel. Like justifying him making those decisions was difficult, and frankly it's still difficult, because one thing I had to deal with Ezra a lot while I was writing, and I'm still dealing with now as I'm working the sequels, like how much is he doing because it's the right thing to do, and how much is he doing because he loves Emmanuel. And navigating that while writing The Year of the Witching was really interesting. Yeah, he's a tough one. He's a tough one. I don't know. What do I lovingly call him? He's just a pain in the butt. Like always. He's ruined so many scenes. I've had to delete so many chapters just because I couldn't get him to cooperate. And stubborn character.
Yeah, it's always interesting me hearing authors talk about their relationship with their characters, because I don't know, they become like real people. They have to for you to understand how they're like navigating the situation and like making their decisions. So stuff like that interests me. You mentioned that you really liked Vera. I guess, why did you choose to add Vera as a character? And like, why did you choose to how did you decide like what role she was gonna have in the story and like what you wanted her to be like?
So I got a really cool edit from my editor, and she was basically like, I would love to see one of Emmanuel's relatives from her father's side, if that's even like a thing that's possible. And editor was also really curious actually about the Outskirts, as was I. I didn't think I had the space in the story to kind of explore that in this book. I thought it was something I'd have to save to the second book. And we kind of asked ourselves, like, well, why not? Like, could we make this work? And that gave me the opportunity to include Vera. And I don't know, she was like partially inspired by Tracy Chapman, and also like my love of Tracy Chapman. And I just was like, I don't want to say like author fan service, but in some ways I feel like that was Vera for me. Like I just thought she was so cool immediately. And when I wrote her scenes, which was actually pretty late, like that was one of the final additions that I made to The Year of the Witching, were those chapters with Vera. But when I added them, I just felt like that it made the book come together in a way that it didn't before. Like I felt like her presence was so needed. As someone also for Emmanuel just to kind of look up to, I think like her existence really helped Emmanuel self-actualize and realize that there was like a future for her beyond Bethel. So yeah, that was kind of why I chose to include and keep her. And it's interesting because, again, it was one of the last things I added to the book. And I feel like when I see people quote The Year of the Witching, it's like oftentimes it's something Vera has said, which is interesting. Yeah, because it was like one of the last things I included. I'm like, thank God that my editor like had that brilliant idea, and then I kind of just ran with it and included those chapters. I think it would be a different, in a ways, darker, not in a good way, darker book without Vera's presence. Like, yeah, she was cool to write. If I could write like a novel or even a short story from her perspective, like when she was like younger, or like leaving Bethel, or right after she left Bethel, even, like that would be something cool I'd like to do at some point, because she's fun to hang out with. She's another stubborn character though, but yeah, fun.
So I wanted to pass along some feedback from the comments. There's another comment that said that they loved your writing, and from the book club yesterday, there were people who were very curious about the Outskirts, very interested in those chapters, and generally did really like Vera as a character. So just wanted to pass that along.
Oh, thank you.
This is bad. My memory is failing me.
No.
I'm trying to remember because it's right there. Oh, so we've talked a little bit about, Emmanuel's like surviving family on her father's side. I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about her family on her mother's side. What was it like writing those relationships? Because her family situation is just so complicated.
Yeah, no, that was like, it was difficult. I feel like, I have like, close relationships with my parents and Emmanuel. So when I transitioned into Emmanuel's like headspace, right, and her relationships with everyone, her family are kind of like strained and complicated for reasons that have really nothing to do with her, like her as a person, who she is. It was hard. And I think like when I talk about like, it was a difficult book to write because it's dark, I'm really talking less about the place often and more about Emmanuel's kind of isolation from the people that she's meant to be closest to. And even within her own family, they love her, but she's a black sheep. And I think that she really doesn't understand, like, I don't think her family really understands how set apart she is from the rest of them, or that like their love for her doesn't change the fact that she is very isolated by the nature of her birth. Yeah, so I think that it was difficult, especially her relationship with Martha, which I think is like, both, physically when her hand gets burned, and emotionally kind of abusive. And yet Martha does love her, maybe in the only way that she's able to love because of her own history and traumas. But that love, that very sparing love, is often communicated in horrible, damaging ways. And so their relationship particularly, which I think is kind of as close to like an active mother-daughter relationship as we see in the page, but a toxic one, was hard for me to write, because I pity Martha, but I also really resent that character for how, she essentially abuses Emmanuel through, a lot of the book. It was difficult to write those scenes for sure.
So I think there's a lot of people who mistreat Emmanuel and Bethel. And there's sort of this question as she gains power and learns more about these plagues, like, is she going to help Bethel? Is she going to like just kind of watch it fall? And I was curious for you, how did you, without, giving things away for people who haven't read yet, but like, how did you decide these are characters that I think we can redeem, these are characters I think can change, and these are characters who are beyond, redemption?
It's hard because if I was in Emmanuel's shoes, I would have been out of there. Like, I would have gone to Vera and never looked back. I would have been like, I mean, I would have felt bad about Ezra, but I probably would have left him too. Like, I'm not built the way that Emmanuel's built. Like, that's just not where my soul is. I think Emmanuel has a lot more optimism and a lot more, she cares for people in a very direct way, to the point where I almost feel like, is this a character who's too self-sacrificial? Like, I think that's almost like her flaw. And I think there's a part of her that I think believes that if everyone was just kind of like convinced, or if you sat everyone down and kind of like managed to reach them knowing that she was reached, that they would do the right thing and they would understand the sickness of our society. I don't believe that that's the case. I believe that a lot of the participants in society are probably beyond help, as sad as that is, or realize the darkness of the society they're participating in, but they're okay with it because they benefit from it. I don't think that Emmanuel necessarily sees Bethel that way. I think she thinks some people are irredeemable, like the prophet, but I'm not sure that at 17 she realizes the full, even at the end of the book, even realizes the full scope of the depravity, and the fact that like there are just some people, even some women in Bethel, despite the way that they've been abused, who aren't going to be saved necessarily from the kind of prison of their religion and their overall mindset. So yeah, that that's a lot of that is like sequel stuff, right? That she
Okay.
the next stage where she's kind of like growing to understand that. But I think in book one, Emmanuel does have this like earnest belief that like almost everyone except for maybe the prophet can be redeemed. And I just like adult me sits here and it's like, but you know.
I was reading this like, to be young and optimistic.
Right? Yeah. And that's why I think it's like, it's quite cool because it's like, I think that spirit, like I remember me being a teen and I felt like that, you know, I felt like, you know, okay, reading the Hunger Games and being like, yeah, like President, what was his name? It was Snow is bad, but like the people in the Capitol, like they just need to like realize, like they can, but it's not like, it's not the, like, it's like, it's more than just a figurehead. And if the figurehead comes, you know, if the evil bad guy figurehead is unseated, like there's still all the people who put him in power and what happens to them. And are they any better? I guess is the question that we're left with and that Emmanuel's going to have to grapple with. But also I think it's like going to have to be a situation too, where it's like a 17-year-old Black girl who is at the lowest rung of a very messed up society is not responsible for fixing said society. Like she cannot kind of redeem everyone through her actions. Yeah. So again, see some sequel stuff, but also some just like, some of that's just like my mindset, I guess, kind of reflecting on the process of writing Emmanuel, because she's her headspace is just so different. I think so pure and kind of noble, but I'm not sure that really is gonna serve her forever.
Yeah, I'm trying to. Okay, so there was a comment who said Martha could have gotten these hands. That was Deidre. I was very upset with Martha as well.
Same. Oh my gosh. Oh,
sorry. There was something you had said that I want to follow up on. It slipped my mind. I'll think of it later at some point. But there was a question from the audience from Kay. How do you think the portrayal of witches has evolved in speculative fiction? And if this was to be adapted, who would you want to cast?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I think that witches have kind of got like before. I remember when I was growing up, which you know wasn't too long ago, like 90s, early 2000s, witches had like more of like a bad rap. Like they were always the bad guys. Some witches that were kind of like the cornerstones of like my personal upbringing. I read The Witch of Blackbird Pond, but I also was a huge Little Mermaid fan, and Ursula to me was everything. I love her. I still love her. Like Poor Unfortunate Souls is like my karaoke song. Like I love it. And so I think that before it was like we loved witches, but we knew we kind of shouldn't. Because they were the bad guys, right? But then there was like more and more movies that kind of like sympathized and sided with witches and became this kind of like symbol of like, you know, feminism pretty recently. And I remember seeing like, you know, the interest in witches ticking up really quickly. And it seemed to kind of follow the trajectory of the Me Too movement. I wrote The Year of the Witching right before then, but it was kind of interesting to watch. It seemed like as this Me Too movement was becoming a thing, like everybody was writing about witches. Everyone had these kind of like feminist takes on witches. And I think that's no coincidence. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing kind of more varied portrayals of witches though. Like I know almost every single culture has some version of a witch, whether or not it's called she or they are called a witch. Witches aren't just women is the other thing. And I would love to see kind of more exploring in that realm. Yeah. So what was the second question? I've already forgotten it.
Oh, if this were to be adapted for film or TV, who would you cast?
Who would I cast? Okay, so I'm Timothy Chalamet trash. Like I'm obsessed with Timothy Chalamet. So Ezra for Timothy Chalamet would love. So that show Pose, there's an actress in it, India.
Oh, India Moore?
Yes, that's her last name. Oh, Moore. Okay. Yeah. I always thought that when like she was like, if I could take a teen version of her and make her Emmanuel, I think would be. Yeah,
I'm just double checking Moore's pronouns.
Oh yeah, pronouns. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
I think they're they them.
They them.
It's been a while since I've paid. It's been a while since I've watched Pose, so I'm not 100% on that. But I just wanted to throw that out there before I forget, because it's something.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. Oh, sorry. No, they use both. Okay.
Oh, both. Okay,
I'm still learning about too, so I just wanted to.
No, me too. I'm so glad you checked. Okay, I'm so glad you checked. But yeah, I think that they would be great. Like I know they're like I think they're in their 30s, but I saw a picture of them, I think, when they were like in their teens or quite like younger, maybe early 20s. And I was like, that is Emmanuel. Like, yeah. So
I could see
I'm
it.
trying to think. Yeah. And Vera, maybe like a Nicole Kidman. I don't know. Somebody, Nicole Kidman plays a crazy white woman like no one else. I feel so. I don't know. Yeah, I kind of just I have like my mental images of my characters, and it's kind of hard for me to like imagine other faces playing them. But I definitely, when I see an actor like or actress that has like the flavor or the vibe of the character, I tend to be kind of like I tend to be able to imagine them. So young India and Timothy Chalamet for I mean, like I can see it. Like, can't you see? Like, I feel like I can see. I don't know. Maybe I'm like, I feel like I can see it in my head. But yeah.
But who would be Vera?
That okay? Tracy Chapman. Tracy Chapman. Someone call Tracy, please. Someone get Tracy on the phone. Like, I'll be the way that I would be like right there. Like, yeah. No, for sure. I don't know. I just that would be the biggest honor. Honestly, at that point, I don't think we need anybody else. It can just Tracy can play everybody. Like as far like everybody that like she just go back and forth. Like, yeah, I don't know. I huge fan. Yeah.
So let's talk about the lake a little bit. So there's this lake in the Darkwood, and Delilah's kind of associated with it. And I guess I was curious why you chose water. I think when I think of this book, I think about blood a lot. I think about fire. And I was curious, why that like one very important scene in the water.
I think that scene kind of came to me like randomly almost. Like I remember just kind of like sitting. I don't even think I was writing at the time. It just like popped into my head almost like fully formed, and I saw the lake. But so when I was like part of that kind of like culty fundamentalist that cult that I was kind of briefly involved in, I lived in a house that was across the street from a pond that's kind of like really similar to the one I described in my book. It looked very, very eerie at night. My bedroom window faced it, so oftentimes I would go to sleep looking at it. And I think that's why this like pond in the middle of the woods was like at the very forefront of my mind, because it just seemed very eerie. But I also wonder if it was something, this isn't, I didn't consciously think about this, but in retrospect, I grew up for like a lot of my childhood, I would go to like Southern Baptist churches, right? There's like a heavy emphasis on like baptism. So I kind of wonder that scene when Emmanuel goes into the water, it's kind of like almost like a dark baptism. She's pulled under, and the moment she comes up, like everything goes to hell and her life is forever changed. She's kind of reborn because she, went under the water in that lake, and they emerged and she sees Lilith. And also again, when she sees the spirits of all of these like slain women in that same lake. So I think there's kind of like some baptismal carryover there from my childhood, like a dark baptism sort of thing.
Someone in the chat had suggested, back to the fan cast question, had suggested Patrick Stewart for the Prophet.
Ooh, I like that. Oh, I really like that. Yeah, I love Patrick Stewart. He's very severe. I think he would be quite eerie. I think he'd make the Prophet more sophisticated than that he deserves to be, but I love it. I'm all for it.
I hadn't had the chance to read the audiobook, but one of the people in the book club had read it or listened to it, and they'd said that the voice acting for the Prophet was like phenomenal. Like they said they really like took it up another notch. And I was curious, did you have any like involvement with the audiobook, or like what was it like to hear your words being read aloud by a voice actor?
It was amazing. I think the voice actor, her name's Brianna Collette, and she's like so talented. I think it was my publishing team, they picked her, and I heard a sample and I was like, yes, she's great. I just felt kind of like, I don't know, it felt like a different experience. I felt like really honored listening to her read the book, but there was also a part of me that was like, dang, I could have been listening to this instead of listening to like a computer read my book back to me, because that's normally what I do. I have like a computer voice that reads back my book to catch my mistakes, all the typos. When I was listening to her, I'm both like bracing for typos, that like my mistakes, not hers, but also being like, oh, it's such a nice experience to hear like how much like emotion she kind of imbued the work with. It's just, yeah, I think she did a great job. She's really, really talented and very kind. I talked to her briefly on Instagram for the first time a few weeks ago. I was able to thank her for her work. I think she killed it.
Let's see, if there's anything else that we haven't covered. I think actually I'll ask one last thing. So Emmanuel is a shepherdess. This is something else that came up in yesterday's discussion. And people hadn't really seen that a whole lot in a fantasy thing. And I was curious, like, why a shepherdess? I think also none of us could remember the animal for the sheep or goat that she had.
I think it was like did I say a ram?
I think it was a ram.
Yeah.
Was that also a symbol?
Yes. And also because I said, originally I was like, oh, he's a goat. But then I was like, oh, wait, why does she have all these sheep? And then there's like one goat in her flock? Because like a goat and a ram are like, anyway. So that's why but I think also rams are kind of scarier. And yeah, then there is a biblical connotation. I chose shepherdess because I viewed Manuel sort of as this like dark Messiah like figure. And again, Southern Baptist, like I'm not a Southern Baptist anymore. Like back my upbringing, like there's all this talk about like, the good shepherd, being a shepherdess. And I also just like, I thought it was kind of a cool job. I wanted Manuel to have like a day-to-day sort of task or job in place of the society. And I thought that I was like, what would I want to do? And taking care of a flock of sheep sounded like pretty cool. It also gave her a lot of opportunities to kind of be in the vicinity of the woods and feel this draw. Whereas if she was like in the house with a baby, I think, it would have been harder to understand why she had this really intrinsic connection to the woods when she didn't spend much time to it. But I like the idea that her life thus far has kind of like run parallel to the forest, quite literally, with the pastures being like, right next to it. So, but I had to like learn a bit about shepherding. I learned so much more than like what's actually in the book. Like, I thought I was gonna have a scene once where like Emmanuel had to like help a sheep give birth, and then I learned all about that. I was like, I could have spared my mind those images because it never came to fruition. But yeah,
I guess what was the weirdest like shepherding fact that you learned?
Let me try to think. Honestly, just what did I learn? I'm trying to think. The thing about the ram, I learned about this one particular type of ram. You see it a lot. I forgot the name of it. It's quite bad. But they can have so many horns. Like the ones, like I kind of thought they were fake, but like one set here, one set going down, one set here, like so many horns to the point where it's almost hard for them to literally hold their heads up. It's almost like they can't quite function. And it's a specific type of ram, but not all rams have those horns. But they appear a lot like as like a satanic symbol, like the Baphomet. But they're real and they look so terrifying. So I learned about them, and I thought about Judas. I think Judas does have a bunch of more horns than the average ram, and that is why. Because I kind of got fascinated by that one specific type. I wish I could remember the name now. But yeah, I think that even back, and also I learned, of course, rams back in like the Puritan times, which is the year of witching is inspired by, they were symbols oftentimes of like the devil. And some people believe that like the devil would like appear as a ram. And you see that also in The Witch too, like Black Phillip, if anyone's seen that movie, the ram is like, I'm not spoiling the movie, but like the ram is a symbol of like dark things. I thought that was cool too. I think that's a thing that's in a lot of cultures. So I'm thinking of like even Krampus, like he looks like a goat, like ram. I don't know why we give ram such a bad rap, but it is what it is.
Yeah. So we talked about this like a teeny bit earlier, but there was a question from the audience. I would love to hear more about the Outskirts. I really want to learn more about their religion, values, ways of being. Will we see more of that community in the sequel?
Yes.
Is there any like little crumbs you can give us, or not really at this time?
Let me try to think of something that like I could say. So the Outskirts, okay, is this going to mess me up? I don't think so. So the Outskirts have more exits and entrances than the one, like the gate of like the Pilgrim's Gate in Bethel. Like they have more means of getting out, and they kind of have this like underground system that, really nobody, like even the prophets that weren't aware of. So they have kind of like connections to the outside. and like pass through the Darkwood that no one really knows about except for like a handful of people. It's kind of almost like underground railroad sort of vibes. So yeah, that's one tidbit. And also, the religion is a mixture of both the Bethel's religion, which was kind of like forced upon them when they came to Bethel as refugees, and something else from the outside, which is why their churches and stuff like that kind of look slightly different. But a lot of those practices they practice in secret. Yeah, so that's two tidbits, I think.
Yeah, that's I know that you can't really tell us much until the book's actually out, so thank you for that.
No, of course.
I don't think I have any more questions. Is there anything that we had like touched on you want to talk about more, or anything else you want to share about like upcoming projects? It's funny, the commenter said, unfortunately now I have tons more questions, regretting asking the question about the Outskirts. You had mentioned you had that short story in the vampire anthology coming out. Do you have a title and like a publication date we should be looking out for?
I actually don't know. I think the publication date has been moved several times, so I'm not sure of when it is now. But it's called Eternally Yours, and there's like some amazing authors that are participating in that. I just like, who has the stories? I want to read them now. I'm really excited. Yeah, so there's that, and hopefully I should have more news to announce soon-ish. We'll see, like fingers crossed, but yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining me. Thank you to all the viewers for tuning in for today's Q&A. Have a good weekend, everybody, and take care. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.